Good afternoon, everybody. It is 1:30, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time and make sure that we end on time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Nikki Antonovich. I work for the Sacramento County Office of Education, and I have with me today my coworker, Kasha Fawn. A little bit about my history. I also actually used to work for CodeStack for the SACE system. Oh, it feels like a million years ago today, but I do see what look like a couple familiar names in our attendee list. So for those of you that have been around with SACE for 7 to 10 years now, hi, it's Nikki from SACE. And today's presentation is all about accessibility resources from the classroom to the assessment. So we're actually going to start with the why of accessibility to help us understand the importance of the accessibility resources that are available to students. Kasha has popped into the chat a bit.ly. This bit.ly contains, it's a link to a Google folder that will contain the notes that follow along with today's presentation and give you all the links to everything we reference, as well as some handouts that we will be engaging with later in the presentation. So if you haven't yet, please click on that link, go to that folder and download those materials. So for the why, California's students demonstrate a wide variety of skills, abilities, and interests. They come from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds. They have different experiences and live various socioeconomic circumstances. And while the population in your district or SELPA might vary slightly from the state makeup, I don't think anyone would disagree that all schools in California serve a widely diverse student population. And this great variation of student population enriches the learning experience of all students, but it can also make the teacher's work more complex. And teachers in California schools really strive to provide that high quality curricula and instruction that is also sensitive and attentive to the needs of all students. And I know as special educators, you guys can embrace that message more so than just, the average classroom teacher. So accessibility for all. A core principle of California's assessments is accessibility for all students who take these tests. Accessibility resources provided on both the CASP and LPAC assessments ensure equitable access for students with diverse accessibility needs and preferences. And I'm going to pause here and do some definitions for anyone who needs it. LPAC is the English Learner Proficiency Assessments for California. It's the English Language Development Assessment that gauges whether students need help understanding instruction in English or how far they've come towards reclassification as English proficient. And CASP is the California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress. Those are the statewide standardized tests, ELA, math, and science that students take at the end of the school year. And they include also the California Alternate Assessment for the students with the most significant cognitive disabilities as well. So CASP and LPAC assessments are designed so students who take them, including students who are learning English or students who have special needs or students who are learning English and have special needs, can participate in these tests meaningfully and demonstrate what they know and can do. And as a result, the summative assessments include accessibility resources that address a variety of access barriers that allow all students to show what they know and can do. CASP and LPAC assessments, the accessibility resources for CASP and LPAC assessments, I should say, are based on the principles of UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. UDL provides a research-based framework for teachers to incorporate flexible materials, techniques, and strategies for delivering instruction, and for students to demonstrate their knowledge in a variety of different ways. It's this principle of UDL that has led CASP to develop a range of accessibility resources available on the assessments. And LPAC too, I guess I should include LPAC in that umbrella. Both CASP and LPAC have all of the accessibility resources that follow UDL. And UDL principles can be used to create a learning environment that provides first-level intervention by identifying student needs and matching them with the appropriate supports before students struggle or fail. So, yep, there we go. Sorry, my computer is being just a little bit slow here. I'd like you to consider an imaginary student, and we're going to name him Patrick. Patrick has difficulty reading and writing. Now, I want you to imagine that Patrick is taking a math test with his class, and the test comes in two formats. One presents the problems on paper, it's your traditional paper pencil test, and the other presents the problems on a computer screen and gives test takers the options of hearing certain words read aloud or problems read aloud through text to speech. A student like Patrick would almost certainly achieve a higher score on this computer-based version of this assessment, given the supports that are available to him. Other students might also benefit from a computer-based format by virtue of the reading supports it offers, their own preference in working with computers, the glossaries that are available, and a variety of other factors. Like Patrick, many students face barriers to achieving the attended curriculum. These barriers can be seen as headwinds that students have to work to overcome. Some barriers students might experience in school are having a primary language that's not English or struggling to decode printed text. Other students experience what we call tailwinds. That is, they benefit from supports at home and in school that help them succeed. So the question we're going to consider in our next hour together is how can we create tailwinds for students who experience the most barriers to learning? Another way to look at it is, in the past, we've often talked about equality in education, providing each student with the same educational opportunities. But as we know, equal does not necessarily mean equitable. So not every student is able to succeed simply by being provided the same opportunity. So in this case, we're talking about the opportunity to ride a bike, right? If we give everybody the same bike, for some, the bike is too big. For others, the bike is too small. For some, the bike might be just right, but some people might not be able to access that bike at all. So our goal is equity. Some students need something entirely different to help them achieve their goals. So when we give each child the same bike, some are left out. But when we provide all kids with what they need, they're able to enjoy the full benefits of the activity. So we are actually going to engage in a quick activity ourselves. I want you guys to pull up your chat box, if you will. It should be across the bottom of your Zoom controls there. If you don't see it there across the top of your screen, it should say you're viewing my screen. If you hover over that, you should find the chat box. There's two parts to this activity, so please stay with us here. We're going to spend the first about 60 seconds listing some possible headwinds or barriers that students in your classroom, your school, your district might be currently facing in their learning. So type that into the chat box, but don't hit enter yet. I don't want you to send your chats out to the main group yet. So 60 seconds just to think through some possible headwinds and barriers, type them out, but don't hit enter on those chats yet. We're going to do a waterfall. So we're all going to hit enter at the same time. So take 30 to 60 seconds, think of those headwinds, type them in the chat box, don't submit them yet. I feel like I need to play the Jeopardy music or something. Okay, hope you're all with us. Hope you have some possible headwinds or barriers thought of, typed into the chat. I'm going to count down and we're all going to hit our enter keys at the same time. 3, 2, 1, go for it. I love it. And I actually learned about this at a conference I attended early in October. It's called a waterfall chat, and it's a way to engage people in their thinking so that, and not that you guys would do this, so that everyone does the thinking and they can't just like steal the first few ideas they see that come through. So I love it. Let's see what we have from you guys. Kasha, do you want to go through some of these that were submitted?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of connectivity and other issues related to distance learning. And beyond that, troubles with decoding the text, visual or motor impairments, lack of skills, lack of technology skills, right? Some learning disabilities, ASD, ADHD, physical impairments, emotional barriers resulting from loss or, troubles in the family, death, divorce, loss of employment, things like that. Lots of great ideas, reading disabilities. I think we are clear that there are many, many different possible headwinds for our students here. Some other ideas could include the lack of mastery of the English language, right? So our emerging English learners, attention processing difficulties, lack of positive role models in the family, again, language, lack of support that came out several times, especially in this climate and in this method of delivering instruction. So thank you. Excellent, excellent brainstorm.
Yes, and I want to call out, there are a few people I saw that are already thinking through how to turn the headwinds into tailwinds, right? Eliza says a reading disability, but the headwind or the tailwind is a read aloud, right? Someone who's easily distracted, from Melissa, the tailwind is extra time for reading. So I love that you're already going there with your thinking. We will get there as a group at the end of this session. And then to what Kasha said, this is actually the first time I've done this presentation since we've been in distance learning. And normally we see the things that are like struggling reader, English learner, student, those sorts of things. But in this climate and nowadays, there are so many more possible headwinds: access, understanding of technology, all sorts of those things that have come from distance learning and social distancing and those sorts of things. So now more than ever, this is even more important. So we're so glad you're here with us today for that. So keep those in mind. We will revisit the headwinds and tailwinds again at the end of the session. And we'll do a fun little activity turning those into some tailwinds as well. So the purpose and importance of accessibility from classroom to assessment, right? California developed assessments that really strive to provide every student with a positive and productive assessment experience. And the goal is to generate results that are fair and accurate of, what each student knows and can do, the accurate estimate of their achievement levels. CASP and LPAC are built on a framework of accessibility for all students. And I think I said earlier, right, including English learners, students with disabilities, English learners, students with disabilities, and so many more. So both Smarter Balanced and California recognize the validity of assessment results depends on each and every student having appropriate accessibility resources when needed. So that's the why. Let's now dive into the wide variety of resources provided on assessments and some tools to help you improve their use in schools and districts. So we're going to start with a definition by defining accessibility. Access and fairness are issues for all students when it comes to learning and testing. Students with specific learning needs may require accessibility resources during instruction and on assessments, right? Both of those pieces are very important, from classroom to assessments, so that they can validly demonstrate mastery of the content. Remember, specific learning styles doesn't only equate to students with special needs. That's why we're here, right? This is all about the SACE system and a special ed conference, but it's really about ensuring that all students have access. And some examples of this are test items that require extensive reading when the construct being measured isn't reading itself. So how can we, scaffold to that for our struggling readers? Or requiring students with fine motor difficulties to handwrite their answers to essay questions when keyboarding could just as easily be used. So an example, the easiest example I'll say of universal design applied to this statewide testing is the fact that they are not timed tests, allowing students enough time to complete the test without needing an accommodation, right? They're untimed, students can take breaks, they can take as long as they need without requesting special accessibility resources there. So a primary purpose of the CASP system, it was actually written into the legislation around it, is to improve teaching and learning. And we want all students to have equal opportunities to access content material and to accurately demonstrate what they know and are able to do. And I know I've said that a lot, but that is also part of, I think, the legislation written around CASP. Improve teaching and learning and let students show what they know and are able to do. So by utilizing the principles of universal design, CASP and LPAC, and including the alternate assessments in this, right? There's the California alternate assessments or the CAAs for ELA, math, science, and the alternate LPAC, which is happening this year. So those are all included, and they've included resources that address visual, auditory, and physical access barriers for our students. There's a wide range of instructional strategies, resources, and tools that are used in daily instruction and on classroom assessments to help students access the intended and tested curriculum. And teachers can be flexible in the way that they present content, the way students demonstrate learning in the classroom, and the way in which we design student engagement activities. And this flexibility doesn't always, or I guess I should say, used to not always exist on standardized tests. While many allowable resources mirror those provided during instruction, on testing, we have to be a little bit more careful, right? We only can accept resources that don't change the construct of what we're measuring. So that's one major difference between how accessibility resources may be used in the classroom versus on the statewide assessments. And we will dig into that, right? So the goal is the accessibility resources students are getting in the classroom are the same or as similar as possible to what they're getting on the test. But on the test, we have to be careful that we're not changing that construct of what we're measuring. Excuse me. So the statewide assessment system utilizes a multi-level approach to providing accessibility resources to students. And we're going to walk through that. So the broadest category that we have are called universal tools, and they are available to all students. It's based on student choice and preference. There is nothing you need to do to turn these on. They are just there. They're available for all students. And this includes things like Break, the zoom in and out feature, highlighter, notepad or scratch paper. You don't need to do anything to request them. They're just there for students, for all students that sit down to take these tests. The next level is designated supports. And if you're familiar with the multi-tiered system of supports, you can think of this as supplemental supports. So universal tools are there for all students. Designated supports are there for some students. But which students? Designated supports are available to students for whom a need has been identified by an adult who is familiar with the student's instructional needs. That is it. You do not need an IEP or a 504 plan to get designated supports. All you need is an adult who's familiar with the student to say they have a need, and they can have a designated support. Finally, the ones we in the special ed world are probably the most familiar with are the accommodations. This is more intensified supports, and they're going to be just for a few students, right? These are for students with an active IEP or a 504 plan. And the accommodations must be obviously written into that active IEP or 504 plan. The one other important key takeaway from this slide is that the use of universal tools, designated supports, or accommodations on the CASP or the LPAC assessments does not in any way affect the student's score. And I think that messaging is finally getting out there, and we're hearing less and less surprise when we say that. But for the longest time, there was a lot of surprise. So I'm going to repeat those 2 key points. Designated supports are available to any student for whom a need has been identified. Does not need a 504 or an IEP to have a designated support, just a need. So struggling readers, English learners, things like that can use designated supports. And if you use universal tools, designated supports, or accommodations on the CASP or the LPAC, there is no impact to the student's score whatsoever. Next, we want to talk about accessibility categories. So these are kind of the ways we think about student needs and bundle the supports. So the resources fall into the 3 basic categories based on UDL. There are resources that support students to remain engaged with the assessment. For example, providing breaks, a separate setting, or even noise buffers. There are resources that support students by allowing them to respond through various actions and expressions. Think of an adaptive keyboard or a scribe. And finally, there are resources that support students by varying the way the assessment is presented. So think about text to speech or a color overlay. And not all student accessibility resources will transfer exactly as they're provided in the classroom, right? We talked about that. CASP and LPAC assessments are seen as being the most forward-thinking in terms of accessibility resources provided to ensure student access. And again, that goes back to, does the resource change the construct of what we're assessing? So that's a little bit of the background about accessibility, and we want to shift our attention now and talk about matching the student to the support. There is what we call the ISAP process, and ISAP stands for Individual Student Assessment Accessibility Profile. And it's a 7-step process that happens, well, it starts outside of the classroom. Steps 3 and 4 are all about the classroom, and then ends again outside of the classroom. But the whole point of the ISAP process is equity, right? Like we talked about earlier. We don't want each student to have supports selected for them differently. We'd like an equitable process for all students. So steps 1 and 2 really happen at the district or SELPA level. Who are the key staff and how can we train them on this process, on the supports that are available, all of it. 3 and 4 really happen in the classroom. It's or with the IEP team or with adults who are familiar with the students' learning characteristics, right? Identifying students and selecting the accessibility resources for those students based on their learning characteristics. And then again, 5 through 6 happen outside of the classroom. It's making sure that the selected resources get into TOMS, which is the test operations management system, so that they show up when the student sits down to take the test, making sure that they're in there correctly before testing begins, and confirming that they were delivered with testing. So we're really going to focus in on steps 3 and 4 because those are the classroom-based steps. And I do see some questions coming in. I promise we will get to them here in just a few minutes. So this graphic really kind of focuses in on, like I said, steps 3 and 4. And it talks about identifying student characteristics, student learning characteristics, figuring out the accessibility needs of those students based on the characteristics, matching the resources, available resources to the needs. And then the outcome of all of that work, right, is an accurate measure of what the student knows and can do on the statewide assessments. A variety of resources and information should be involved in this decision-making process. Information comes in, or should come in, I should say, from a variety of sources. educational history, parent input, language proficiency information. That's where that LPAC score can come in. The language of instruction, academic performance, physical and medical information, the resources that are currently used in the classroom or were previously used in the classroom, and whether those work for the student or miss the mark a little bit, as well as information solicited from key stakeholders, including the student themselves. So all of this information is pulled in, it's processed, and the information that comes out is some type of documentation on the identification and selection process, right? We in the special ed world have it easy because we have IEPs, we have meeting notes, it's all well documented. It's kind of just already there for us. But again, we want this equitable process to take place so that whether, the student's on an IEP or not, whether they're getting accommodations or not, whether they're getting designated supports, ideally there's some documentation to kind of show that it's an equitable process and equity is happening. There's no legal requirement. It's not in regs or in legislation anywhere that it has to be written down or notated in any way. But I mean, you guys know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, right? Document, document, document. It never hurts to have documentation. So maybe pass that one on to your gen ed colleagues. Here's another one where you in the special ed world are already ahead. Think about a team approach. You guys have IEP teams. It's basically already done for you, right? But when you're identifying student needs for use of these resources, we want a team approach. Initial identification of student accessibility should begin at the classroom level, since teachers know the most about their student learning characteristics, including their strengths and their challenges, those headwinds and those tailwinds, if you will. Educators can collect student performance data with and without the use of accessibility resources to determine what resources benefit the student. Parents can contribute information. Again, all of this is kind of built into the IEP process. So you've got it easier than, gen ed folks where there might not be a process for documenting this for gen ed students with a learning need. Another powerful method is asking the student, doing a student interview. Some things you can ask is what is hard for you? What is easy for you? You can try out some of the resources and ask the student, did that work for you? Did it not work for you? In the folder of materials that we have for you, and I think Kasha's going to pop that link in the chat. Thank you, Kasha. There is a sample student interview form. Again, not anything you have to use, but there for you if you want to take a look at it, adapt it, share it with your gen ed folks. It's just an easy way to kind of gather student level information about what is and isn't working for them, the students themselves. And then again, special education in section 504 plans. Individual needs are considered for students with IEPs and 504s. And the goal for these students with IEPs and 504s is to provide developmentally appropriate opportunities and access to these assessments. So in general, as you guys know, the IEP teams make determinations based on the student's individual needs, including potential participation in alternate assessments. We just want the same kind of determination made for all students based on their individual learning characteristics. So again, you guys are kind of ahead here because these teams are already in place, right? The partnership between the parents and the teachers and the student themselves are already in place.
Vicki, would this be a good time to address the one question we have in the chat about 504 plans?
I'm going to hold that one till we get to this activity that pulls up the placemat, but yes, we will get to that in just a second. Okay, so going back to matching resources to student needs, we want to ensure that daily instruction includes a variety of strategies and resources for the widest needs of the diverse students in our classroom. So all students aren't going to need the same accessibility supports. Some might not need any beyond the universal tools, and some might need the more intense accommodations. But we want to make sure that all students can equitably access the test, so we know the knowledge and skills that the students have that the test is intended to measure. Once we've identified student learning characteristics and accessibility needs, we're ready to figure out the resources that support that. And the biggest takeaway here is that familiarity is key, right? Back in the early days of Smarter Balanced, we heard some conversations, and they weren't frequent, but some conversations that it was like a shopping list for kids, the list of designated supports and accommodations. And the conversation has shifted a lot in these past years, and it makes me really happy that it's less of a shopping list and more of, what is the student already getting in the classroom, and how does that translate to the assessment? Because if you throw a support at a student the day of testing and they've never seen it before, it's no longer a tailwind and it's more of a headwind for them, a barrier, right? So practice, practice, practice. Students should have lots of exposure and practice to the supports before they sit down at that assessment. They should be familiar, comfortable, and confident using these supports. Ideally, again, they're the same or very similar to what they're using in the classroom, but there's also tools that can make the student more comfortable with the version offered on the assessments. Things like practice tests or training tests, where they can try out the assessment-related accessibility resources before they ever sit down in that assessment. So it might be similar to what they're using in the classroom, but they've still seen it and are familiar with how it presents on the assessment. We have a really cool resource here. It's, oh, how do I want to explain this? Okay, so normally the accessibility resources are organized by type: universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. This resource planning tool organizes accessibility resources based on the category of need. So instead of all of the universal tools being together and then all of the designated supports being together, this has all of the supports for engagement in one column and all of the supports for action and expression in another. So you can kind of identify the student need, go to that column and see what is available. Another thing I will point out, it's not here in this presentation, but at the end of the note-taking guide is the link to the CDE accessibility webpage. It's there. It's called the ISAP tool. It used to be an Excel spreadsheet where you could only do 15 kiddos at a time, and it would spit out at the end like a file that can be loaded into TOMS. It has now gone web-based. You can do more than 15 kiddos at a time, and you might not need the part that spits out the file for TOMS, right? Because SACE has that already. There's a report you can run in SACE and just upload it straight into the TOMS system. The benefit of the ISAP tool and this resource are that you start with the student characteristics. You can check things like the student's a struggling reader, the student is an English learner, and it will kind of whittle down the supports for you based on those characteristics that you've identified. So if you're brand new to accessibility, not super familiar with what is out there, that is a great place to start. And this one, this resource planning tool, which is in the Google Drive folder for you, Kasha just dropped that link in the chat. It also lists the type of support in parentheses. So all of the universal tools are in parentheses as a U. Designated supports are out there as a DS. And so you know what level of support you're getting into, as well as what type. So we're going to apply our learning a little bit, right? We talked about the purpose and the importance, the types and the categories, the equitable process and the team approach involving the student. So now we're going to apply that learning in the Google Drive. I mean, there's a lot in there, but I want you all to find the document that says ELA supports, I think is what it's called. It looks like a placemat. And I'm actually going to see if I can pull it up here. And I'm sorry, I lied. I said ELA. I meant math. Let's try that again. Please pull up the one that's called Math Resources. Mine is loading. It looks like this. And so this is why I wanted to wait to answer that question. Accommodations are available to students with individualized education programs and Section 504 plans. So a student with a 504 plan, yes, they can use accommodations. And if you ever have questions about that, you can just refer to this. I call it a placemat. You can refer to the placemat. It'll help clarify some of those things. What we're going to do, oh, yes, I will enlarge this. I also recommend that you just grab the one directly from the Google Drive, and you can pull it up on your own as well. I am going to pull up a student profile, and you guys are going to have a couple minutes to think through her learning characteristics, as well as some of the resources that would be good for her. We're going to do a couple minutes of individual work, and then we'll do another waterfall chat to see what your answers are and talk through some of those. So this is Emma. She's a 7th grader. She has an IEP. She's been in the US for 3 years. She's literate in Spanish. She likes math, but she struggles with word problems. She's performing below grade level in all content areas. Her LPAC performance is moderately developed, and she's easily discouraged when completing independent assignments and assessments. So a couple of key things to call out here. Literate in Spanish, that will be important in helping select some of the supports. Has an IEP, that means accommodations are on the table. You can look at that box as well. So take, let's say 2 to 3 minutes to kind of do your own work, and then we'll share out some results. And then I'm just going to switch over to this view for the last 60 seconds for anyone who might need it. Okay, we are going to do another waterfall chat here in just a second. But before we do, there is a question in the Q&A box that I want to answer. It says, under designated supports, there's usually a read aloud and a text to speech. How do you determine which support is necessary? And that really comes down to the kiddo, right? You as the special educator or part of the IEP team is going to know them better than anyone else. Are they familiar with a text to speech feature that's embedded into the computer interface? Have they used something like that before? Are they used to you reading aloud the directions instead? Right? We talked about practice and familiarity. We don't want to sit a kid down in front of an assessment and say, you have text to speech now, good luck, if they've never encountered that before. So you'll know which one they're more comfortable with or works better for them. And if you don't, you can ask them, right? You can do a student interview. Okay, so take a couple seconds into the chat box, but don't hit enter yet. We're going to do another waterfall. Type in a support or two that you've identified for Emma. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. Okay, and we're all going to hit our enter keys in 3, 2, 1, go. Seeing a lot come through. I like it. Okay, so let's unpack some of this, right? Translations. Yes, she is literate in Spanish. We can do things like stacked translations for math or glossaries or things like that. Now, if she wasn't literate in her native language, we would not want to turn those things on because we would then be adding to her cognitive load instead of easing it, right? But because she is literate in Spanish, we can do those sorts of things. Illustration glossary, simplified test directions. Yeah, she's a struggling reader. She struggles with word problems and things like that. Text to speech, word prediction. Is that one for math? I'm not sure. That might be an ELA one that we would consider. Kasha, are you seeing anything else out there that? Oh, I like separate setting, right? If she's easily distracted or things like that.
Mostly just language related, some breaks, oral clarification of test directions.
Yeah.
Maybe masking to prevent, the destruction of the language environment.
Yeah, I like the breaks if she's getting easily discouraged, a break to kind of walk away and reset. You guys did really good with that one. I like it. So these are some great activities. Again, I don't know what your role is, if you ever do any PD back at your site, or if I have mostly classroom teachers here with me, but these types of matching activities are great. You come up with the student profile, or you pull one and you just kind of like talk through what resources would work, what resources wouldn't work for the student, and kind of help, calibrate staff around you as to what's available. So as we kind of come to a close here, we want to remember that CASP and LPAC assessments were designed to maximize accessibility for all students. In California, we serve that diverse student population that comes to us with varying levels of skills, knowledge, and abilities, and requires various levels of instructional supports and scaffolding. At the same time, some students may encounter barriers, right? Those headwinds. So what I want you to start thinking about is those headwinds that you wrote down earlier in the session. How can you pick out accessibility resources and turn them into tailwinds? In the, both in the classroom and on the assessment, I guess I should say. And as our little graphic here shows, we know equality, always giving all students the same thing, isn't necessarily the best thing. We are striving for equity. In the note-taking guide that accompanied this presentation, on the very last page are a bunch of links to a bunch of resources for you. That CDE webpage for accessibility resources will have all of the placemats, as will our Google Drive, as well as what we call the matrix. It has like a really long name, like Student Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix, maybe. I think I got that right. It's basically an extended version of the placemat. So if you look at the placemat and you think to yourself, is this same resource available on other assessments, or is there a description of it? The matrix is the place to go for that. The placemats are just nice, short, sweet, simple one-pagers that are easy to kind of print or share around. But a whole bunch of resources in there for you. Another thing I love to point out is that the testing contractor, Educational Testing Service, or ETS, has created short videos of the embedded resources being used. So if you want to see what something looks like in the testing environment, in that note-taking guide is a link to a page, has all of the videos. They're super short. They're all about 30 seconds or so, and it kind of shows you the resource in use in testing. So if you want to see it before you try assigning it to a student to get a better feel for it, those videos are a great resource. That is all we have, and we have about 6 minutes left. So thank you for being here with us. If you're going to take off, I totally get it. If you have questions, please pop them into the Q&A in Zoom, and we will try to answer them.
Nikki, so there are a couple questions in the chat. One is from Leanne, and she's asking if there is a text-to-speech in Spanish.
I don't know. But my recommendation there would be to pull up the matrix, go to that section, read up on text to speech, and see what they say. They will have all the information for you there.
Another question, Nikki, was from Gloria, and she wanted to know whether a student with a 504 plan can use accommodations.
Yes, they can, right? So if we go back to this placemat, up here it says available to all students. That's universal tools and designated supports. Remember, any student can have a designated support. They don't need an IEP, they just need an identified need. And then down here below on the bottom half, accommodations and the California alternate assessments, or resources for the alternate assessments available to students with an IEP or Section 504 plan. Now, the IEP must be active and the accommodations must be written into the active IEP, but they are available. Great questions. Anything else we can answer for you? As my computer beeps and dings. All right, I don't see any more questions coming in. So thank you all so much for being here with us. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Oh, here's a question. Do the universal tools and designated supports need to be documented? No, in terms of they don't need to be in any sort of like active plan or anything like that in order for you to turn them on. Yes, in terms of for designated supports, your SELPA, your district, your site will have some sort of process for identifying them for students and then making sure that they are then turned on in the proper system, right? So for a student who doesn't have an IEP, check for what the process is for how to get the right supports turned on in the system for the right students. There will be a process there. That being said, document. You always want to document. It never hurts to have a form, or maybe it's part of your student information system or things like that where the process and the selections were documented. Someone is asking, are you allowed to put both read aloud and text to speech down for CASP support? I will say that there's nothing in the system that I know of that's going to stop you. But for that one, I would reach out to CDE. If you email them, casp@cde.ca.gov, because it's a policy question, they will give you a much more accurate answer. And then you'll have it in writing from the powers that be officially. But I think you can, but you want to be careful and definitely check with the CDE. And Kasha threw that email address in the chat box for you there. All right, that's all I'm seeing. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.